They mocked me as a servant in my own home, so I purchased the mansion they always envied. The rain hammered against the windows of Uncle Vernon's estate like angry fists, each drop a reminder of the storm that had taken everything from me 3 years ago. I pressed my face against the cold glass of the kitchen window, watching the droplets race down while my hands worked automatically, scrubbing, wiping, cleaning. Always cleaning. Maya, where's my coffee? Aunt Claudine's shrill voice cut through the morning silence, like a blade. I could hear her heels clicking against the marble floors of the grand foyer, each step echoing through the cavernous house that had become my prison. Coming, Aunt Claudine, I called back, my voice smaller than I intended. At 18, I should have felt more confident, more sure of myself. Instead, I felt like that terrified 15-year-old girl who had arrived at this doorstep with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of grief. The coffee maker gurgled as I prepared her usual, extra cream, 2 sugars, served in the delicate china cup that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I had learned all their preferences by heart over the past 3 years. Uncle Vernon liked his eggs over easy, with exactly 3 strips of bacon. Brielle, my cousin, demanded fresh orange juice squeezed by hand because the store-bought kind was beneath her standards. And Aunt Claudine? She expected perfection in everything, especially from me. Finally, she huffed as I entered the morning room, balancing the coffee service on a silver tray. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden rays across the Persian rug that I had vacuumed just yesterday. Aunt Claudine sat at the mahogany table in her silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly styled even at 8 in the morning. She didn't look up from her phone as I set the cup before her. "The bathroom upstairs needs attention," she said, scrolling through what looked like social media posts. "And don't forget to polish the silver before tonight's dinner party. The Hendersons are coming, and I won't have them thinking we live like peasants." "Of course, Aunt Claudine." I kept my voice steady, though something inside me always twisted when she spoke to me like hired help, which I supposed was exactly what I was in her eyes. "Oh, and Maya?" She finally looked up, her blue eyes cold and calculating. "Wear the black uniform tonight when you serve. Not that old gray thing. You look like a street urchin in it." Heat crept to my neck, but I nodded. The black uniform made me look more like the staff, and less like family. That was the point, wasn't it? As I turned to leave, Brielle swept into the room like a hurricane in designer pajamas. At 21, my cousin had inherited her mother's sharp beauty and her father's sense of entitlement. Her long blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders as she dropped into a chair with dramatic flair. "God, I'm exhausted," she announced, though it was barely past 8 and she'd done nothing but sleep in. "Maya, be a doll and make me some of those crepes I like, with the strawberries and that fancy cream. I need to clean the upstairs bathroom first." "The crepes, Maya." Brielle's voice carried that edge that meant arguing would only make things worse. "Mother's bathroom can wait. My breakfast cannot." I felt Aunt Claudine's eyes on me, waiting to see if I would push back. I had learned long ago that resistance only brought lectures about gratitude and obligation. "We took you in when no one else would," Aunt Claudine would say during these moments. "We feed you, clothe you, put a roof over your head. You better earn it." And so I would earn it, one breakfast at a time, one cleaned bathroom at a time, one polished silver piece at a time. "Of course, Brielle," I said, forcing a smile. "Strawberries and cream." As I returned to the kitchen, I caught my reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. Mousy brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, dark circles under green eyes that used to sparkle with dreams, clothes that hung loose on my thin frame. When had I become so small, so invisible? The cooking was rhythmic, almost meditative. Crack the eggs, whisk the batter, heat the pan. My mother had taught me to make crepes when I was 12, standing on a step stool in our tiny apartment kitchen. She would laugh when I flipped them too early, creating misshapen blobs instead of perfect circles. "It's not about perfection, sweetheart," she would say, flour in her dark hair and love in her eyes. "It's about the joy in the making." But there was no joy here. Only obligation. The memories hit me like they always did, sudden and sharp. Mom and Dad, driving home from their anniversary dinner. The other driver, drunk and reckless, running the red light. The phone call that shattered my world in the space of a heartbeat. Maya? Uncle Vernon's deep voice startled me from my thoughts. He stood in the kitchen doorway, adjusting his expensive tie. Even at 55, he was handsome in that distinguished way that wealthy men often were. Silver at his temples, kind eyes that had once made me feel safe. Everything all right? Yes, Uncle Vernon. Just making Brielle's breakfast. He walked over to the coffee pot, pouring himself a cup. For a moment, it was almost normal, almost like family. I know this isn't easy, he said quietly, glancing toward the dining room where his wife and daughter's voices carried. But you know we care about you, right? Taking you in wasn't an obligation, Maya. Your family. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But family didn't make family scrub toilets. Family didn't make family wear uniforms to serve dinner parties. Family didn't call family names like Cinderella. Where are my crepes? Brielle's voice sang out in mock sweetness, using the nickname that had stuck since my second week here. The name that made the other staff members, the ones who were actually paid, look at me with pity. Uncle Vernon's face tightened slightly, but he said nothing. He never said anything when they called me that. When they treated me like the help instead of his brother's daughter. I should go, he said, checking his watch. Board meeting this morning. After he left, I finished the crepes and served them with a smile that felt painted on. Brielle barely looked up from her phone as she ate, occasionally making comments about her plans for the day, shopping with friends, lunch at the country club, a spa appointment. Oh, Maya, she said around a bite of strawberry. Could you pick up my dress from the dry cleaner? The blue one for tonight's party. I do it myself, but I'm meeting the girls and you know how traffic gets. I knew because I was the one who usually ran all their errands while they lived their lives of leisure. The afternoon blurred together in a familiar pattern. Clean the bathrooms, polish the silver, vacuum the rugs, dust the countless expensive ornaments that filled every surface. The house was beautiful, I couldn't deny that. But it felt like a museum where I was both the curator and the ghost haunting its halls. As evening approached, I changed into the black uniform as instructed. The fabric was stiff and uncomfortable, with a white collar that made me look like something from a period drama. I caught Brielle smirking as I passed her room. Perfect, she said, lounging on her bed in a robe while her hair stylist worked. Very authentic. You look just like the maids in those old movies. The dinner party was a blur of serving courses, refilling wine glasses, and staying invisible while the guests talked about stock prices and vacation homes. The Hendersons were there, along with the Blackwells and the Montgomerys, all families from their social circle who spoke in the casual way of people who had never worried about money. Claudine, darling, you simply must tell me about that divine chandelier, Mrs. Henderson gushed, gesturing toward the crystal fixture that I had spent 2 hours cleaning that morning. Oh, it's nothing special, Aunt Claudine replied with false modesty. Though we did have our eye on the Willow Creek mansion. Have you seen it? Absolutely stunning. 6 bedrooms, marble everything, and that rose garden. One day, I swear, it'll be mine. I was clearing plates when she said it, and something inside me went cold. The way she said it, with such certainty, such entitlement. As if the world owed her beautiful things simply because she wanted them. Maya, careful. Brielle hissed as I nearly dropped a wine glass. God, it's like she's never served before. The guests laughed politely, but I felt the heat of embarrassment burn through me. In that moment, I wasn't a grieving niece who had lost everything. I wasn't a girl trying to find her place in the world. I was just clumsy help who couldn't even clear a table properly. Later, after the guests had gone and the family had retreated to their rooms, I stood in the kitchen washing the endless pile of dishes. My hands were raw from the hot water and harsh soap, but I kept scrubbing. The physical pain was easier to handle than the emotional exhaustion. This was my life. This was what I had become. But as I dried the last plate and put it away, something nagged at me. A memory from earlier in the day when I had been cleaning Uncle Vernon's study. He had been rushing to leave for his meeting, and I had noticed a file cabinet drawer slightly open. Papers had been scattered on his desk, official-looking documents with letterheads I didn't recognize. At the time, I had thought nothing of it. Uncle Vernon was always dealing with business matters, investments, legal documents. But now, in the quiet of the late evening, something about those papers felt important. I told myself I was being silly, that grief and exhaustion were making me paranoid. But as I climbed the servant stairs to my small room in the attic, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were secrets in this house. Secrets that somehow involved me. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung heavy in the night sky. Through my small window, I could see the lights of the city beyond the estate grounds. Somewhere out there was the life I was supposed to have had. The future my parents had dreamed of for me. But tomorrow would bring more cleaning, more serving, more of being treated like I owed them my very existence for the privilege of having a roof over my head. I fell asleep that night with tears on my pillow, unaware that everything was about to change. Unaware that the truth was hiding in plain sight, just waiting for me to be brave enough to look for it. The opportunity came 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon when the house felt unusually quiet. Uncle Vernon had left for another one of his business trips to Chicago, Aunt Claudine was at her book club meeting, and Brielle had gone shopping with her friends. Even the housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, had taken the afternoon off for a doctor's appointment. I was alone in the sprawling mansion, surrounded by the echoing silence that seemed to amplify every creak and whisper of the old house. I had been assigned to organize Uncle Vernon's study, a task I usually dreaded because of his particular way of wanting things arranged. But today, with the memory of those scattered papers still nagging at me, I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. The study was Uncle Vernon's sanctuary, all dark wood and leather-bound books that smelled of expensive cologne and old money. His massive mahogany desk dominated the room, and behind it stood a wall of filing cabinets that I had dusted countless times but never dared to examine closely. I started with the obvious tasks, dusting the furniture, organizing the papers on his desk, emptying the wastebasket. But my eyes kept drifting to that slightly open drawer I had noticed days earlier. It was calling to me like a secret begging to be discovered. Just a quick look, I whispered to myself, glancing toward the door. He'll never know. My hands trembled as I pulled the drawer open wider. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with neat handwriting. Most were boring business documents, tax returns, property deeds, investment portfolios. But one folder, tucked behind the others, caught my attention. The label read, Old Holdings Deceased. My heart began to pound. Deceased could mean many things, but in this house, it felt personal. It felt like it might be about my parents. I pulled the folder out with shaking hands and opened it on the desk. The first document made my legs weak. It was a stock certificate, yellowed with age, bearing my father's name in bold letters. David Chin Morrison, 2,500 shares of Elmsford Ventures. I stared at the paper, reading the words over and over. My father's name. My father, who according to Uncle Vernon had died practically penniless, leaving me with nothing but medical bills and debt. But this said otherwise. This said my father had owned shares in something called Elmsford Ventures. A lot of shares. I flipped through more documents, my breath coming in short gasps. There were more certificates, some in my father's name, some in my mother's. Sarah Chin Morrison, 1,800 shares. David Chin Morrison, 3,200 shares. Together, they had owned over 7,500 shares of this company. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the date on the most recent valuation document, 3 months after my parents' death. The shares were worth over $4 million. $4 million. I sank into Uncle Vernon's leather chair, the papers scattered before me like pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to complete. My parents hadn't been poor. They had been wealthy. Very wealthy. So, why was I scrubbing floors and sleeping in a servant's quarters? My hands shook as I continued reading. There were corporate documents, board meeting minutes, and letters from lawyers. The company, Elmsford Ventures, appeared to be some kind of investment firm. And according to these papers, my parents had been founding shareholders. One document made me gasp out loud. It was a partnership agreement, dated 15 years ago between my father and someone named Marcus Elmsford. They had started the company together, with my parents providing the initial capital and Marcus providing the business expertise. But here's what made my blood run cold. There were handwritten notes in Uncle Vernon's distinctive scrawl along the margins. Notes that said things like Emmy pushed out successfully and shares consolidated under Vernon Morrison as executor. I read faster, my heart hammering against my ribs. Another document showed that Marcus Elmsford had been forced to sell his shares to Uncle Vernon just months after my parents' death. The sale price was listed as nominal compensation for breach of contract. This couldn't be right. This couldn't be legal. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of every document, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. The camera flash seemed too bright in the dim study, and I kept glancing at the door, terrified someone would come home early. But I couldn't stop. I had to document everything. The final document in the folder was the most damning. It was a declaration of estate insolvency, filed by Vernon Morrison as executor of David and Sarah Morrison's estate. It declared that my parents had died with more debts than assets, leaving their minor daughter with no inheritance. It was signed and notarized. It was official. It was also, according to the stock certificates I had just found, a complete lie. Uncle Vernon had stolen my inheritance. He had used his position as executor to hide my parents' wealth and claim it for himself. He had made me believe I was a burden, dependent on his charity, when in reality, I should have been the one with millions in the bank. I sat there in his chair, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: rage. Pure, burning rage that started in my stomach and spread through my entire body like fire. All those nights I had cried myself to sleep, grateful for their generosity. All those times I had scrubbed their toilets and served their dinner parties, believing I owed them my life. All those moments when Brielle called me Cinderella, and I had taken it because I thought I deserved it. I had been living a lie. We had all been living a lie. But I was the only one who didn't know it. I carefully put the documents back in the folder, my mind racing. I couldn't confront Uncle Vernon directly. He was too powerful, too connected. I needed help. I needed someone who understood legal documents and corporate law. And suddenly, I knew exactly who to call. Ms. Tanisha Lewis had been my mother's best friend in college. She had spoken at my parents' funeral, promising to be there if I ever needed anything. At the time, I had been too lost in grief to really hear her. But I remembered her now, a successful corporate lawyer with kind eyes and a fierce smile. I had her contact information in the old address book my mother had kept. If anyone could help me understand what these documents meant, it would be her. I took one last look around Uncle Vernon's study, making sure everything was exactly as I had found it. Then I quietly closed the folder and slipped it back into its hiding place. But I wasn't the same girl who had walked into that room an hour ago. That girl had been a victim, a charity case, a servant grateful for scraps. This girl had just discovered she was an heiress, and she was ready to fight for what was rightfully hers. I waited until the next morning to call Ms. Tanisha Lewis, my heart pounding as I dialed the number I had found in my mother's old address book. I had barely slept, my mind spinning with questions and possibilities. What if she didn't remember me? What if she thought I was crazy? What if Uncle Vernon found out? Lewis and Associates, this is Tanisha speaking. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, warm but professional, with that slight southern accent that had always made me feel safe. Ms. Lewis? This is Maya Morrison, Sarah and David Morrison's daughter. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath.
Maya?
Oh my God, sweetheart, how are you? It's been so long. I've thought about you so many times over the years. Tears threatened to spill as I heard the genuine concern in her voice. I'm okay, but I need help. I think my uncle has been lying to me about my parents' finances. Can you meet me today? My office, around 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Getting away from the house without suspicion required careful planning. I told Aunt Claudine I was going to the library to research colleges, a lie that she accepted with barely a glance. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was supposedly too poor for college, while potentially sitting on millions. Tanisha's office was in downtown Chicago, in a sleek glass building that made me feel small in my discount store clothes. But the moment I walked into her office, she swept me into a hug that smelled like vanilla perfume and felt like coming home. "Look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length. "You look so much like your mother. But baby, you're too thin. Are they feeding you properly?" I almost laughed at the question. They fed me the same way they fed any servant. "Ms. Lewis, I found some documents." I pulled out my phone, hands shaking as I showed her the photos I had taken. "I think Uncle Vernon has been stealing from me." Her expression changed as she scrolled through the images, her lawyer's mask sliding into place. "Baby, sit down. Let me look at these properly." She transferred the photos to her computer, enlarging them on her large monitor. I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign that I had been wrong, that I had misunderstood something crucial. Instead, she gasped, "Holy shit. What? What is it?" "Maya, honey, these are controlling shares. Your parents didn't just have money, they had power. They own the majority stake in Elmsford Ventures." She turned to face me, her expression grave. "Do you know what this company does?" I shook my head. "It's a venture capital firm. They invest in startups, real estate, emerging technologies. According to this valuation, the company is worth close to $20 million. And your parents owned over 40% of it." The room seemed to spin. $20 million. 40%. But how could Uncle Vernon just take it? Isn't that illegal? Tanisha's jaw tightened. Extremely illegal. What he did here. She pointed to the estate insolvency document. "This is fraud. Criminal fraud. He used his position as executor to hide assets and steal your inheritance." She stood up and began pacing, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "And this business about Marcus Elmsford being pushed out, I remember your parents mentioning him. He was like family to them. They started this company together after college. What happened to him? I'm going to find out." She grabbed her phone and started dialing. "Marcus? It's Tanisha Lewis." "Yes, it's been too long. Listen, I need to ask you about David and Sarah Morrison." "What? When did this happen?" I watched her face grow darker as she listened to whoever was on the other end. "I see. No. That's very helpful. Can you meet us today? It's urgent." She hung up and turned to me with fury in her eyes. "Maya, it's worse than we thought. Marcus Elmsford didn't just get pushed out of the company. He got destroyed. Vernon sued him for breach of contract right after your parents died, claiming Marcus had been embezzling funds. Marcus lost everything fighting the lawsuit. His reputation, his savings, his house. He's been working as a night security guard for the past 3 years." The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. Uncle Vernon ruined him? Completely. And he used forged documents to do it. Documents that claimed your parents had discovered Marcus's embezzlement before they died and were planning to remove him from the partnership. My hands clenched into fists, but they never would have done that. Mom and Dad loved Marcus. He was at every birthday party, every Christmas. "I know, baby. Your parents trusted Vernon to take care of their business interests if anything happened to them. Instead, he saw an opportunity to grab everything for himself." Tanisha pulled up more files on her computer. "I've been doing some digging while we talked. Vernon has been living very well off your parents' money. New cars, expensive vacations, that mansion he lives in? He bought it 6 months after your parents died. With your money. The mansion. The place where I scrubbed floors and served dinner parties. Bought with my own inheritance. There's more," she continued. "He's been voting your shares in board meetings, making decisions about investments and company direction. He's essentially been playing CEO of a company he stole. What can we do?" Tanisha smiled for the first time since I'd arrived, and it was fierce. "We're going to destroy him, legally speaking. I'm filing an emergency injunction to freeze those shares immediately. Then we're going to demand a full audit of the company's finances and Vernon's actions as executor. Won't that tip him off? Honey, he's going to know something's up the moment those legal papers hit his desk. But by then, we'll have already secured the evidence and protected your assets." She leaned forward. Maya, you need to understand something. When this comes out, and it will, your life is going to change completely. You're not just getting your inheritance back. You're getting justice for your parents and for Marcus. I thought about Marcus, working night security after losing everything. I thought about my parents, who had trusted their brother to protect their daughter and their legacy. I thought about every day I had spent believing I was worthless, dependent on charity. How long will it take? The injunction should be filed today. Vernon will receive notice within 48 hours. After that, she grinned. After that, the real fun begins. As I left her office that afternoon, I felt like I was walking on air. For the first time in 3 years, I had hope. More than hope, I had a plan. Uncle Vernon had stolen my past and my future. He had turned me into a servant in what should have been my own home. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the daughter of David and Sarah Morrison. And he was about to learn just how dangerous that mistake really was. The next 3 months were a masterclass in patience and deception. While Tanisha worked behind the scenes, filing injunctions and building our case, I had to continue living under Uncle Vernon's roof, pretending nothing had changed. It was torture. Every morning, I served breakfast with a smile, while knowing I was actually the rightful owner of everything around me. Every night, I cleaned their bathrooms while evidence of their fraud sat in a lawyer's office downtown. The hardest part was watching Uncle Vernon's daily routine, reading his newspaper, discussing business deals over dinner, acting like the successful entrepreneur he pretended to be. But I had become an expert at hiding my feelings. 3 years of being treated like a servant had taught me how to wear a mask. Tanisha called me regularly with updates, always when I was alone. The injunction had been filed and approved. A forensic accountant was quietly auditing Elmsford Ventures' books. Marcus Elmsford had agreed to testify about Vernon's fraudulent lawsuit. The net was closing, but slowly, methodically. We only get one shot at this, Tanisha reminded me during one of our secret phone calls. Vernon has money and connections. We need to be absolutely bulletproof when we make our move. The call I had been waiting for came on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch for Aunt Claudine's bridge club, when my phone buzzed with Tanisha's number. It's time, baby. The court summons will be delivered today. My hands shook as I hung up.
Today.
After 3 months of investigation, after years of lies, today the truth would finally come to light. I went about my usual tasks with mechanical precision, but inside, I was electric with anticipation. Dust the living room, vacuum the dining room, polish the silver. Each mundane task felt surreal when I knew that in a few hours, this entire world would come crashing down. Uncle Vernon was in his study when the doorbell rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. I was folding laundry upstairs, but I could hear Mrs. Chin answering the door, then the formal voice of the process server. I need to speak with Vernon Morrison. I have legal documents to deliver. My heart hammered as I heard Uncle Vernon's office door open, his footsteps crossing the marble foyer. There was a brief exchange of words, the rustle of papers, then silence. The silence stretched so long I began to worry something had gone wrong. Then Uncle Vernon's voice erupted through the house, like thunder. What the hell is this? I crept to the top of the stairs, careful to stay hidden. Uncle Vernon stood in the foyer, his face purple with rage, gripping a sheaf of legal documents. Mrs. Chun had wisely disappeared back to the kitchen. Aunt Claudine came running from the living room, her bridge game forgotten. Vernon? What's wrong? You're shouting. I'm being sued. He waved the papers in the air. Sued for fraud, embezzlement, and theft. They're claiming I stole Maya's inheritance. The word inheritance hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. That's ridiculous, Aunt Claudine said, but her voice wavered. Maya doesn't have an inheritance. David and Sarah died broke. You told us. I know what I told you, Vernon snapped, then seemed to catch himself. He looked around the room as if suddenly aware that the walls might have ears. This is some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding. But I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew exactly what this was. Brielle appeared at the top of the stairs, having heard the commotion from her room. "What's all the yelling about?" "Nothing, darling," Aunt Claudine said quickly. "Just some business confusion. Go back to your room." But Brielle had inherited her mother's nosiness. She patted down the stairs in her silk pajamas, her blonde hair perfectly tousled. "Is someone suing us? How exciting!" "It's not exciting." Vernon's voice cracked with stress. It's harassment. Legal harassment from ambulance-chasing lawyers trying to make money off tragedy." I watched from my hiding spot as he continued to rant, his story becoming more elaborate with each word. But the panic in his eyes gave him away. He knew his carefully constructed lies were about to collapse. Over the next week, the house transformed into a fight zone. Lawyers came and went at all hours. Vernon spent entire days on the phone, his voice alternating between fury and desperation. Aunt Claudine stopped hosting her social events and started drinking wine at breakfast. Brielle, for the first time in her life, seemed genuinely worried about something other than her appearance. And through it all, I continued my daily routine. Serving meals, cleaning rooms, doing laundry. But now I watched everything with different eyes. I saw the fear creeping into their faces. I noticed how they stopped talking when I entered a room. I observed Uncle Vernon's increasing paranoia as he realized his perfect crime was unraveling. The breakthrough came 2 weeks after the initial summons. Tanisha called me while I was grocery shopping, one of the few times I could speak freely. "Maya, we got him." The forensic audit found everything: forged documents, hidden bank accounts, fraudulent corporate filings. And Marcus provided testimony that completely contradicts Vernon's version of events. What happens now? The court has ordered Vernon to return all assets immediately and pay damages for the fraudulent management of your estate. Maya, honey, you're about to become very wealthy. More than wealthy, you're about to have the power to control your own destiny. As I drove back to the house that had been my prison but was actually bought with my own money, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm was almost over. Justice was finally coming. But there was one more thing I wanted to do before this chapter of my life closed forever. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized that the servant girl they had tormented was actually the one holding all the cards. The court ruling came down on a crisp November morning, just as the first snow began to dust the windows of what I now knew was legally my house. Vernon was ordered to return all stolen assets, pay punitive damages, and surrender his position at Elmsford Ventures immediately. The total amount? $12 million. $12 million that had been mine all along. But money wasn't enough. Not after 3 years of being called Cinderella, of scrubbing toilets I shouldn't have had to touch, of believing I was a worthless charity case. I wanted something more satisfying than a bank balance. I wanted poetry. I wanted the mansion on Willow Creek. "Are you sure about this, baby?" Tanisha asked when I told her my plan. We were sitting in her office again, but this time I wasn't the desperate girl in secondhand clothes. I was wearing a tailored suit I'd bought with my first check, and I felt powerful. "That house is expensive, even for you. $3.2 million. "I'm sure," I said, remembering every time Aunt Claudine had sighed over that property. "She's obsessed with it. Has been for years. Every dinner party, every social gathering, she talks about how one day it'll be mine." Well, today it becomes mine. Tanisha grinned. "I love the way your mind works. Let me make some calls." The purchase happened faster than I'd expected. When you have $12 million and excellent credit, real estate transactions move quickly. Within 2 weeks, I was the proud owner of the 6-bedroom Mediterranean-style estate with arched windows, marble floors throughout, and that famous rose garden Aunt Claudine had coveted. But I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Instead, I spent my days at the house, working with interior designers and party planners. I had the entire place professionally cleaned and staged, filled with fresh flowers and elegant furniture. I hired a catering company for what I told them was a very special housewarming party. The hardest part was continuing to live at Uncle Vernon's house during this time, pretending nothing had changed. The family was in complete chaos. Vernon spent his days with lawyers, trying to find some way to appeal the court's decision. Aunt Claudine had stopped speaking to most of her friends, too embarrassed to face their questions. And Brielle had been forced to return several expensive purchases when they realized their credit cards were being frozen. But I served their meals and cleaned their rooms as if I was still their grateful dependent. The irony was delicious. On the day of my housewarming party, I got up early and prepared breakfast as usual. Vernon sat at the table, his hair unwashed, dark circles under his eyes. He'd aged 10 years in the past month. "Maya," he said quietly as I poured his coffee, "I want you to know that everything I did, I thought I was protecting the family. I thought it was what your parents would have wanted." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. Of course, Uncle Vernon. He was still trying to justify his crimes, even now. Still trying to make himself the hero of his own story. That afternoon, while they were all out dealing with their various legal and financial crises, I left an envelope on the dining room table. Inside were 3 gold-trimmed invitations to a housewarming party at the Willow Creek Mansion, signed only with my initials, MM. No explanation. No return address. Just an invitation to the house of their dreams. I had changed into an elegant black cocktail dress and was already at the mansion when they arrived. Through the front windows, I watched their car pull up the circular driveway. Aunt Claudine stepped out first, wearing a hat that was ridiculously large, as if she could hide behind it. Vernon followed, looking confused and irritated. Brielle emerged last, practically vibrating with curiosity and desperation. They stood at the front door for a long moment, probably wondering if this was some kind of mistake. The massive oak doors opened before they could ring the bell. I had hired a butler for the evening, because the symbolism was too perfect to resist. "Good evening," he said in his crisp British accent. "You're expected. Right this way." I positioned myself on the marble staircase that curved gracefully down into the foyer. The same kind of staircase I had cleaned at their house, except this one was mine. As they walked through the doorway, I could see their faces changing from confusion to awe to something approaching horror. The house was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across the marble floors. Fresh white roses filled every room with their scent. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the perfectly manicured gardens beyond. It was everything Aunt Claudine had ever dreamed of owning. And there I stood, at the top of the stairs, no longer in a black uniform but in silk and diamonds, smiling down at them like the queen of my own castle. "Welcome to my home," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the soaring space. The silence that followed was perfect. Aunt Claudine's hand flew to her throat, her face going white beneath her makeup. Vernon's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Brielle just stared, for once in her life completely speechless. "You're home," Aunt Claudine finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I descended the staircase slowly, savoring every step. "Yes. I bought it last week. Cash purchase. Isn't it lovely?" The butler appeared with a tray of champagne glasses, offering them to my guests with professional courtesy. Vernon took one with shaking hands, but Aunt Claudine and Brielle seemed too stunned to move. "I know how much you've always admired this place, Aunt Claudine," I continued, accepting my own champagne. "You've talked about it at every dinner party for years. One day it'll be mine, you always said. Well, today it became mine instead." I raised my glass in a toast. To family. The word hung in the air like a challenge, loaded with everything that had passed between us. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. Vernon was the first to break it, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Maya, we need to talk. There are things you don't understand about the situation." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue. "I understand that you stole $12 million from an orphan teenager. I understand that you destroyed Marcus Elmsford's life to cover your tracks. I understand that you made me believe I was worthless while living off my inheritance." Aunt Claudine finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. We were trying to protect you. You were so young, so grieving. We thought. You thought you could get away with it." I walked past them into the living room, my heels clicking on the marble I now owned. You thought a 15-year-old girl was too broken to fight back. They followed me like lost children, and I realized with sudden clarity that they had always been the weak ones. All their cruelty, all their petty power plays, it had been the behavior of people who were fundamentally insecure, desperately trying to feel important by making others feel small. Please, Brielle spoke for the first time, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. We know we made mistakes, but we were family. We were trying to do our best in a difficult situation. I turned to face her, this girl who had called me Cinderella for 3 years, who had delighted in my humiliation. She looked so young suddenly, so fragile in her designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Family, I repeated, tasting the word. Is that what you call it when you make someone scrub your toilets? When you force them to wear a uniform to serve your dinner parties? When you mock them in front of your friends? We were hard on you because we cared, Aunt Claudine said, but even she seemed to realize how hollow the words sounded. I set down my champagne glass and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the rose garden. The view was spectacular. Rolling lawns, perfectly pruned hedges, and hundreds of roses in every color imaginable. It was the view Aunt Claudine had fantasized about for years. Do you know what the interesting thing is? I said, not turning around. I'm not angry anymore. It was true. Standing in my own home, surrounded by my own beautiful things, I felt peaceful. The rage that had sustained me through months of legal battles had evaporated, replaced by something much more powerful: certainty. I spent 3 years believing your version of my story, that I was a burden, a charity case, someone who should be grateful for scraps. But that was never true, was it? I was never the poor orphan you made me out to be. I was the rightful heir to a fortune, and you were the thieves. I turned back to face them, and something in my expression must have told them that pleading was pointless. The court has ordered you to move out of the house on Elm Street by the end of the month, I continued. Don't worry, I've purchased a lovely 3-bedroom cottage for you on Maple Avenue. It's fully paid for. Consider it my gift to family. Uncle Vernon's face went red. You can't do this. That house has been in our family for... That house was bought with my money. My voice carried the authority I had never been allowed to use before. Everything you've owned for the past 3 years was built on stolen wealth. Be grateful I'm letting you keep anything at all. The cottage on Maple Avenue was modest but comfortable, a far cry from the mansion they were used to, but more than adequate for their actual means. Most importantly, it was 2 blocks away from Willow Creek, close enough that they would see my gates every time they left their house. Maya, Uncle Vernon tried one last time, his voice breaking. Your parents loved you. We love you. Doesn't that count for something? I studied his face, looking for any trace of the man who had once seemed like a father figure to a grieving teenager. But all I saw was a stranger who had worn a mask for 3 years, pretending to care while systematically destroying my future. My parents did love me, I said quietly. That's why they worked so hard to build something I could inherit. That's why they chose Marcus as their business partner, someone they trusted to carry on their vision. You destroyed all of that for money. I walked past them toward the front door, signaling that our conversation was over. The butler will show you out. There are cars waiting to take you home. As they filed past me, Aunt Claudine stopped and grabbed my arm. What happens now? To us, I mean. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. Manicured nails that had never done real work, soft skin that had never known hardship. Now you live with the consequences of your choices, just like I had to live with mine. After they left, I stood alone in my beautiful foyer, listening to the silence echo through rooms that finally, truly belonged to me. I had rebuilt my parents' legacy, reclaimed my rightful place, and ensured that Marcus Elmsford would never have to work as a night security guard again. I had offered him his old position back at Elmsford Ventures, with full restoration of his reputation. The next morning, I joined the board of directors at Elmsford Ventures, taking my rightful seat at the table my parents had built. The other board members welcomed me with the respect due to a majority shareholder, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Every day, I drive past the cottage on Maple Avenue on my way to work. Sometimes I see them. Uncle Vernon tending a small garden, Aunt Claudine walking to the local grocery store, Brielle taking the bus to her new job at a department store. They look smaller now, ordinary, human. And every evening, when I return to my mansion on Willow Creek, I remember who I really am. Maya Morrison, daughter of David and Sarah Morrison, heir to their dreams and keeper of their memory. I used to be their servant. Now I am free.